Hey, welcome back to Summer Connect. You probably were expecting to see Charlotte, and so was I. But as happens sometimes, the internet can be a fickle kind of beast, and that's what happened tonight. Charlotte's connection just would not cooperate tonight. So you've got me. My name is Nate Artle, and I'm the director for Summer Connect. I'm also newly the director for online strategies for Cru, which is a new thing for Cru. So I'm excited that I get to take Summer Connect and do some other things online over the next number of years. That's going to be really fun. We are glad to have you guys with us. It's going to be really fun tonight. This is our last week for those of you who are watching live. Now, some of you are watching this recorded on tape delay, and so you get to watch this later. But for those of you who are watching live, we're glad to have you with us. This is our last week together. We're going to have a great time together tonight. We have a few things for you. And I hope you guys have enjoyed interacting with us all throughout the summer on social media. We hope you've had a great time at your hub locations. For those of you who are watching on your own tonight, we hope this has been a great program for you. We hope you've been able to connect with some friends there at home and had a good time with us this summer. But just a shout out to all of you who have been a part of connecting through social media this summer. It's been really fun to have you guys connect with us in that way. And I wanted to do a special shout out for one hub that has really gone above and beyond this summer and has done a great job, not just connecting through social media, but also doing a great job at helping your students at that location to connect with Jesus over the summer, to have great community with each other, and to be involved with our Faith Step Fridays all throughout the summer. And that hub is Penn State University. You guys have done a fantastic job all summer. I'm really glad that you guys have been with us. And as one last prize for you guys get an ice cream party. We threw an ice cream party for a hub earlier in the summer, and we're going to throw another ice cream party for you guys. And the cool thing at Penn State, because I actually just visited Penn State for a college visit for my senior son, because he's going to college in a year, which is crazy. But you guys have a great creamery there right on campus. It's kind of famous, right? Well, you guys, we're going to treat you all to some ice cream at that famous creamery. So you guys enjoy. We'll be in touch with you for how to do that. But thanks again to all of you for interacting with us all throughout the summer. We're really grateful for that. Another thing we've really enjoyed this summer is hearing from students all around the world. Seriously, all around the world. It's been really fun. And we get to hear from one more student tonight, and that's Marissa Gutierrez. So we're going to have her come on. Marissa had actually moved from northern Mexico to the U.S., and now she goes to Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. And Marissa, we're glad to have you with us tonight, and we are going to hear a little bit about what God has been doing in your life. So take it away.
Thank you, Nate. Hi, everyone. Like Nate said, my name is Marissa, and I'm actually from a small city in West Texas named Odessa. But like Nate said, I grew up in northern Mexico in a city called Chihuahua. Yes, just like the dog. And growing up in Mexico, I actually never considered it home. I knew that once my mom retired, we would move back to West Texas. So I always looked forward to that day. And when I was 13, my mom finally retired and my family moved back to Odessa. And I thought, like this is home. I'll finally be in a place where I can belong and be accepted. But the reality was a bit different than that. I actually realized how real racism is still today. And I was actually bullied and made fun of at school for the way I looked, for the way I talked. And I found that to be very confusing and very aggravating because as a 13-year-old, I didn't understand why when I grew up in Mexico, I was proud of being an American. But once I was in America, I was told that I had to be ashamed of being Mexican. And that brought a lot of insecurities to my identity growing up. And I actually developed a lot of anxiety because of it, because I didn't really open up to anyone about what was happening, not even to my parents. But I think my mom started noticing something different in me, and she encouraged our family really to just be a part of the community and maybe even find a church. And for me growing up, God was just an old man far away from me who I probably didn't want to make mad. And the idea of Jesus was just, maybe he's just another cross on the wall. And I didn't really know if he had anything to do with me. But I ended up going to this group of students, my own age, who all came from different backgrounds, different cultures. But they were all super loving and accepting towards one another. And even though none of their lives were perfect, they had this joy about their lives and themselves and how they treated others. And they thanked their relationship with Jesus because of that. And for me, having a relationship with Christ was a whole new concept. I didn't know you could do that. But I saw how that changed their perspective on life and treating others. So I desperately wanted that. So in the summer of 2008, I made it my mission to seek and to understand that God did have created a home for me where I would be loved and accepted. But because our society is not perfect and I'm not perfect, that promise of a home was broken. But the man on the cross actually did have a lot to do with my life, because he came into this earth to live and die and resurrect and beat death in the grave for my sins and for my mistakes, so that promise could be restored, and that so one day I would be able to experience the feeling of being home and being fully loved and fully known and fully accepted by our Father. So that radically changed my life. It radically changed the way I saw myself as a Mexican American, the way I saw other people's cultures. And fortunately for me, God even has used our relationship to show me little bits and pieces of what home will be like. And a lot of it has been thanks to Cru. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you so much, Marissa. It's so fun to hear what God's done in your life, and really excited for what that's been. And thanks for being a part of what we're doing this summer. And thanks for being a part of what's happening there at Texas Tech. So we're really, really glad to have you with us this summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Reckon.
All right, cool. All right, guys. Well, we have our last speaker for this summer, and that's Rich Perez. And we're going to have him come on here in a second. But Rich actually had a chance to speak with us this past week at Cru 17, which is the big staff conference out in Fort Collins, Colorado. And Rich, actually, he's a pastor in New York City, and he grew up there. He grew up in the Washington Heights area. He came to Christ at a young age, and it was in his 20s that he felt a call to go back and actually plant a church in his home area there in New York City. And so he planted Christ Crucified Fellowship there in 2011. He's been pastoring there ever since. I love what Rich had to share with us this past week at Cru 17. I'm really glad he gets to share with you guys tonight. So take it away, Rich.
Hey, what's up, y'all, man? I hope you guys are doing well. I'm super excited to be here with you guys. This is quite the experience, virtually being able to connect with you guys. So I thank God for just the blessing of technology and being able to engage with one another, share one another stories. Marissa, man, I'm so grateful. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm so grateful for your story and your courage and your faith to continue to follow God despite the ridicule and despite the adversities. Big ups to you, girl. Really grateful for your story. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, let's jump right into it. I want to be able to talk to you guys a little bit about the power of honesty in the journey with Jesus. And that might sound super simplistic, but I think that there's something really powerful about honesty and the impact that honesty can have as we walk the way of Jesus, as we love our neighbors, as we go to school, as we engage with our professors, as we engage with folks in the neighborhood. Honesty has more power than sometimes we often think. So before we jump into the text, if you have a Bible or an app, whatever you're looking at, you can put your finger on Luke chapter 6. We're going to be there. But I do want to share this little story. So several months ago, I went to breakfast with some friends, two good buddies of mine. We've been friends. One I've been friends with for the last 10 years. The other I've been friends with for the last 30 years. So I'm giving a little bit away of my age. But we went out to breakfast with a good brother who's now a pastor here in the city. And he's been a huge influence to us. His name is Pastor David Ham. He's one of the pastors at the very famous Times Square Church here in New York City. But for a long time, Pastor David was an influence to a deep influence, and continues to be a deep influence to me, my buddy Alex, and my buddy Andy. And so we, as a token of our appreciation, every year on David Ham's birthday, we take him out for breakfast. And so a few months ago, we took our friend out to breakfast, and we had tons of fun. We laughed a ton. We joked a ton. We reminisced a ton. We recalled all the times where we would do ministry together. We shared all the stories of how Pastor Dave had been just in our more formative years, such a huge influence to us. And so we laughed and we joked and we cried even some. But I remember particularly after we laughed and after we joked, and the dust kind of settled and we all realized we had to go back to our schedules and we had to go back to meetings and sermon prepping and making music and designing and all of that stuff. It was at that moment that I realized what really leaves an impact on a person. It was after laughing, it was after joking, it was after crying that I realized that what truly leaves an impact on a person, or at least even in my experience, is not so much our efforts to neatly package our lives, but what leaves an impact on a person is our honesty. And hopefully what I get to do over the course of the next few moments is to unpack that for us. That yes, absolutely, as I looked at the life of these men, yes, it was their faith that had inspired me throughout the course of our relationship and our friendship, but it was their honest journey with Jesus that has impacted me most deeply. That yes, I knew that they had faith in Jesus, but despite knowing that they had faith in Jesus, it was knowing that they always didn't believe is what impacted me. That yes, they had faith in Jesus, but I also knew that they didn't always believe in Jesus. I knew that they trusted in Jesus, but I also knew that they trusted in other things sometimes. I knew that they had obedience toward Jesus, but I also knew that they disobeyed Jesus plenty of times. And it was that up close and personal relationship and that kind of tension of sometimes I love, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I trust, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I obey, sometimes I don't. It was being able to see that honest journey that deeply left an impact in my life. And for those of you here, what I'm really advocating for is this: that it is an honest journey with Jesus that leaves the greatest impact. The kind of honesty that says, yes, Jesus, I believe you, but help me when I inevitably don't believe. It's the kind of honest journey that says, Jesus, you are the King of creation, but help me to trust you as the Lord of my life, as the Lord of my finances, as the Lord of my relationships, as the Lord of my career. What I'm calling for today is not what I would call calculated openness, which is where we expose some of our weaknesses or even dress up some of our confessions so that we would ultimately look like the model transparency person, or so that we would look like the perfect model or the true model of vulnerability. I'm not calling for calculated openness. What I'm calling for is true vulnerability, where you actually run meaningful risks. You know what I'm saying? Like, you actually run the risk of losing things because you're that vulnerable, right? You don't calculate, you don't neatly package your openness. You're truly vulnerable. And with true vulnerability comes meaningful risk. You can lose this relationship. You can lose that job. You can lose this or lose that. That's the kind of honesty that I'm calling for. And that's the kind of honesty that I think truly transforms us. That's the kind of honesty that best positions us to experience the deep grace and power of God. You see, I'm not calling for mere openness, where you control how open and vulnerable you are. I'm calling for meaningful and true vulnerability, where you run the risk of losing things. Because at the end of the day, if there's anything that you get from this talk, y'all, is this: the path to experiencing deep transformation is honesty, is an honest journey with Jesus and your neighbors. The path to experiencing deep transformation is an honest journey with Jesus and your neighbors. So let's go to Luke chapter 6. I'll read it for us, and then I'll share some thoughts. It says here, Luke chapter 6, verses 37 through 42. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Now, let me pause here. You guys can read the rest on your own time. I want to have enough time to really share some of my reflections. But the first thing I want to kind of drill into this talk is this. If you're going to journey with Jesus, honestly, the first thing that you have to be honest about is God. You have to have an honest perception, an honest view of who God has revealed himself to be. Now, this is really clear in the first two verses. If you read verses 37 and 38, you see it there blatantly. Look at what it says in the first, and look at what Jesus says in the first few verses. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Now, you can't begin to understand verse 37 without first taking a step back to verse 36, where I think it frames it for us. And I promise this is going to help us to see how we need to be honest with God. Verse 36 says this, be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Now, the context of this story is Jesus sitting at the foot of a mountain, talking to hundreds of people. And among those hundreds were the faithful few, those that were following him, not just because he was trending, not just because Jesus was going viral, but because they actually started to follow Jesus faithfully. And what Jesus does on the Sermon on the Mount is that he kind of ups the ante a little bit. He says, listen, y'all been following me for a bit. I know I've been trending. I know I've been going viral. I know that I'm the rock star according to you guys. I've got this huge following, but let me up the ante a little bit. I'm going to help you guys see that to follow me will require so much more of you than you think. And so that's what this Sermon on the Mount actually begins to show us. And then when Jesus says this, do not judge, do not condemn, but rather forgive and then give generously. When he says that off the coattails of be merciful just as your Father also is merciful, Jesus is doing something really significant to the crowd. Now, remember, he's talking to a bunch of Jewish folks. And so when you hear those two statements kind of off the coattails of each other, what Jesus is definitely doing here is that he's helping the crowd recall the numerous times and ways that God, even in the Old Testament, decided not to judge them by what they deserved, but instead showed mercy. So when Jesus makes this statement, he's saying, all right, let me put this into view for y'all, because I don't want you guys to forget what kind of God you're following. I don't want you to forget who Yahweh is. I want you to know that God has been incredibly patient with you. In fact, he's been more so than that. He's been merciful with you. So now you begin to understand, okay, I see the frame. I see Jesus's posture. I see what he's doing here. Jesus is calling the crowd to judge with the same measure that God has been judging them since the Old Testament, since Abraham, since Moses, since Jacob. And it's this, an all-embracing mercy. Jesus is saying, yo, the measure that God uses on you, you ought to use on others. And let me tell you what that measure is. That measure is mercy. And so he's framing for them, the listeners, that God is a God of mercy. Now, all in all, what we see Jesus doing in these few verses here, what we see Jesus doing here in these few verses is that he's urging his disciples to refrain from two things and then engaging in two other things. He says, refrain from judging and condemning, but then also engage in forgiveness and generosity. But I think what's most interesting about all of this story is that the only time Jesus elaborates on what he's asking the disciples to do is when he urges them to give. Did you notice that? He says, yo, do not condemn, do not judge, rather be generous and give. And then he goes on to expound, he goes on to explain more. He elaborates on the idea of giving. Now, I find that really interesting, because out of all those imperatives, all those commands that he gave him, do not judge, do not condemn, be generous and give, the one that he explains is generosity. The one that he explains is giving. He says, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured onto your lap. Now, you probably heard that in the Pentecostal church, right? You know, pressed down, shaken together, and runneth over. But But I think in the context, we realize that he's describing the nature of God when he does this. Now, I remember I grew up in New York City, and we've got bakeries all over the place, and we drink our oatmeal. I don't know how y'all take your oatmeal, but we drink it, and it's most of the times dumped in sugar. And so I remember as a teenager going to the bakery down the block from where I grew up, and there was this massive machine at the bakery. Now, if you know anything about these massive coffee machines, you know that there's like this little handle thing with a cup with a cup kind of at the bottom. And in that cup or in that container, you throw the coffee grain and you make sure that it's kind of heaping over the container. And then the lady kind of takes the container and she smacks it up on this massive thing. And then she kind of just cranks it, so letting us know, yo, the coffee's almost coming. But I was always fascinated with how they filled that container. I was fascinated because what they would do is they would fill it with coffee grain and then they would kind of shake it a little bit. And I always wondered why, until one day I asked. I said, well, we shake it so that the grains can literally fill every crevice of the container. And then after they shook it so that it could fill all of the container, then they would offer more grains over so that it was kind of heaping. And then once it was heaping over the container, then they would press it up against the machine and crank it in and turn on the coffee maker. And from that, we'll ultimately get your nice cafecito. And for those of you that don't know what that means, your nice little coffee. But I remember envisioning that as I looked at this story that Jesus is saying here. And what I think Jesus is doing is that he's urging the crowds to realize that they're like a container. He's like, yo, listen, when I use this example, when I elaborate more on the idea of giving, I want you to realize that every single one of you is like a container that is either filled with harsh and fruitless judgment and condemnation, or you're a container filled with generous forgiveness and an attitude of giving. And when I hear that, I think to myself, oh, wow, this is the God that I serve, the one that kind of carries this nature and then calls me to the same. And then I have to ask myself the question, and I pose it to you guys. Which container am I? Am I the container that's filled with harsh and fruitless judgment and condemnation? Or am I the container heaping over with generosity and an attitude of forgiveness? Yet what we hear Jesus saying here should not come to us as a surprise. Jesus is spending hours on this mountain, attempting to shape the innermost parts of the people that he's speaking to. And just a couple verses before he tells them not to judge nor condemn, but rather to forgive and give generously. He says this, and you can go on your own time. You go back a few verses. He says this: love your enemies. Do what is good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. But love your enemies. Do what is good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great and you will be children of the Most High. I found that really interesting, that the moment we adopt this posture of generosity and a posture of giving without expecting and a posture of forgiveness, even to those who mistreat us, those who are foreigners to us, those who are strangers to us, when we adopt that posture, that's when we will be known as the children of the Most High. You catch that? He says, then you will be children of the Most High, for he is gracious to the ungrateful and the evil. Do you see what's happening here? God is not like us. And the temptation or the tendency that we often have is to project onto God things that we think of ourselves or of others. We think, man, well, this person hurt me, so I couldn't imagine God being one that extends deep forgiveness. I know as a Christian, I got to forgive. I understand that. But how far do I go? How deep does my forgiveness go? Which things do I forgive? Which things do I not? But you see, God ain't like us. Isaiah reminds me of this, right? His ways are not my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts. You see, we have to do better at not projecting onto God our own fallacies. We've got to do better at not projecting onto God our own capricious hearts, our own bitter hearts, our own vengeful hearts. You see, God ain't like us, is what Jesus is saying here. He says, listen, when you learn how to pray for those who persecute you, when you learn to love those who mistreat you, when you learn to give without expecting anything in return, when you learn to love deeply in this way, it is then when you become a children of the Most High. For he is gracious to the ungrateful and to the evil. You see, God ain't like us. But it seems like we've misunderstood Jesus' words here, or perhaps misheard Jesus' words here. Rather than loving our enemies, we tolerate them. I'll say that again. Rather than loving our enemies, we tolerate them or ignore them. Rather than doing good to those who hate us, we are satisfied. We are okay with simply not returning the evil they gave to us. Do you hear that? I think we kind of misconstrue Jesus' words here very conveniently sometimes. Rather than loving our enemies, we tolerate them or ignore them. Rather than doing good to those who hate us, we're satisfied with not repaying their evil. We're like, oh man, he hit me, but I didn't hit him back. But did you embrace them? Did you love them? Did you forgive them? Did you pray for them? You see, this is the honest view of God that we must have. God is generous to us. And there's no more generous, honest picture of who God is than Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Then Jesus said, while he hung on a cross, not for his own sins, but for our own, not for his own brokenness, but for ours, not for the darkness that he had brought into the world, but for the darkness that we brought into this world. As he hung there, he said, Father, forgive them because they do not know what they are doing. And they divided his clothes and cast lots. You see, the basis of Christian ethic is not fundamentally do as you would like to be done to you, but do as God would do. The basic ethics of Christianity, of your faith and mine, is not so much do as you would like to be done to you, but rather do as God would do. See, because sometimes God, if not all the times, God will go the extra mile and he will demonstrate a radical forgiveness, a radical mercy. But what else do we need to be honest with? And here's my concluding thoughts. Not only do we need to be honest about God, but we need to be honest about ourselves. Look at verse 41. It says, why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't see the beam of wood in your own eye? Now, this verse reminds me of what one brother said to me one time. He said, we often judge ourselves by our intention and others by their action. We often judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. You see, because it is far more difficult. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. It is far more difficult to pry open and expose our own hearts than it is to judge others by what they do. It's a scary thing to peel the layers back of our hearts, isn't it? It's a really scary thing. And it's true for us today, and it's obviously true for those in Jesus' days. But why is it so scary? Well, because we don't want to be honest with ourselves. It's scary because we either fear what we'll find deep inside of us, or we fear the abandonment that we know will come if we're exposed. You see, if we're not, why is it so easy for homeboy in this text to point out the dust in his brother's eye, but he ignores the beam in his? Oh, you see, what could possibly be down at the depths of my heart? Is it that I'm more insecure than I thought? Is it that I'm more prideful than it seems? That I'm bitter even though I've spent my time saying I'm not? That I'm a cheater? That I'm a liar? That I'm a fake? What am I going to find down at the depths of my heart if I really look, if I really ask hard questions, if I really pray and ask God to show me things that I can't even see myself? I am too afraid of what I will find, or I'm too afraid of how people will respond and how they might possibly abandon me if they discover that I'm a cheater. If they discover that I'm a liar, if they discover that I'm a phony, if they discover that I'm bitter and I'm supposed to be this exemplary Christian leader. So what do? In an effort to avoid facing those really ugly things that you could possibly find down there, we make it about someone else. We make it about someone else's failure and someone else's shortcoming. We deflect attention just like this brother is doing here. Well, I don't want to look at the beam in my eye. I'm afraid of what I'll find. So you know what? I'll make it about the speck in my brother's eye. I'll leave you guys with this. I don't want to go too much over my time, but I'll leave you guys with this. A few verses later, Jesus goes on to talk about a tree. If you notice that, a few verses outside of what we focused on today. He goes on to talk about a tree. He says a good tree doesn't produce bad fruit and a bad tree doesn't produce good fruit. And he goes on to say a good person, just like this tree, produces good out of the good stored up in his heart. In other words, if we're going to be those that produce the good fruit that will go on to impact our world, we will have to be honest about the bad that's oftentimes overcoming our hearts. We'll have to be honest with ourselves. Our greatest obstacle to transformation is our inability to be honest. You hear? Our greatest obstacle to gospel transformation is our inability to be honest. Our inability to deeply wrestle with the truth about ourselves is what aggressively keeps us from experiencing the deep transforming grace and power of Jesus. The question that we often ask ourselves is this: is it possible to be honest about ourselves, but yet not be weighed down by what we know about ourselves? In other words, can you really peel the layers back, discover something really broken, really dark, really ugly, and not be self-loathing because of it? That you could be bogged down? That's not what we're trying to get after. We're simply trying to get after the truth that it is only in our honest journey with Jesus. The closer we get to the light, the darker, the more we see our darkness. Can we be honest with ourselves? And verse 41, I think, caps it all off so beautifully. Verse 40 kind of puts it all into this gracious perspective. He says this: a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. I love that. You know why? Because Jesus is essentially talking about himself. It's only when we travel deeper into our pain and into our brokenness and into our darkness that we can feel the deep sense of power, the deep sense of light, and the deep sense of victory. But without the honesty to travel into the depths of who we are, of our own mess, of our own darkness, we could never experience the fullness of what it means to be whole in Jesus. We are too afraid of discovering the ugliness, the unloveliness, the darkness, and the sin of our lives. But guess who was not afraid of doing that for us? His name is Jesus. It was in the ugliness of his naked, shameful, and barbaric death that Jesus took on a cross with our brokenness, not his own, with our darkness, not his own, with our sin, not his own. He said, I will bear the burden of your darkness. I will bear the burden of your shame. I will bear the burden of your sin, so that in my own nakedness and in the shame that I'm carrying for you, you would no longer be afraid. You see, when he says here, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be just like his teacher, what he is saying is, do this. Be honest about God and be honest about yourself, because I've already gone before you. And I hope that as you look at this text, and perhaps you see it with fresh eyes, that you would learn to be honest about who God really is, and that we would stop projecting onto him who we think he is. That we would look at the text and we would look at God as a merciful, loving, all-forgiving God, and not think that he's anything else. But also that you would learn how to see yourself honestly. And sure, who's not afraid of discovering something ugly? Who's not afraid of discovering something so hideous that you think and you believe that you could never be loved again, that you could never be forgiven again? But here's what I want to tell you. Jesus is not afraid for you. Jesus carries your darkness. Jesus carries your unloveliness. Jesus carries your sin. And he says, be afraid no longer. Trust me in what I've done. Hope you guys are blessed by that.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, and just for your word about being honest with God and being honest with ourselves. I think that's one of the most transformational truths that we can have. And it kind of allows us to really be, like you said, naked before the Lord. And it takes the courage from the Holy Spirit to be able to even do that. So thank you so much for your words. Well, I'm not Nate. And my name is Charlotte. I'm back with you guys. The internet minions try to take me down, but the Lord prevailed, and I'm back with you guys. As Nate mentioned earlier, this is our last week together, and I can't believe it's been 8 weeks. But we're so glad to be able to have joined you and to have all the different guest speakers over the last 8 weeks, and to have Faith Step Friday with you guys every week. So I want to share with you all our last Faith Step for the summer. And really what that is going back, having some more conversations with people who you talked to earlier in the summer. And even as a hub, considering doing a Christmas in July party. So I know some of you all, it's hot where you're at. Here it's kind of cloudy and overcast. But think about having some sort of theme party where you can invite people to, encourage them to come out, play games, eat food, and really just have some good conversation, getting to know people, and also have some spiritual conversations should the Lord allow for that to happen. And also, this is a great time for you to invite them to get involved in your fall semester plans with Cru or with Epic, Destino, Impact, Cru High School, whatever you're doing. Invite those people back to get involved with your campuses there. So by way of some announcements, one more thing you can do, okay? And it's going to the movies. Now, I haven't been to the movies in a while, but you can take a group of people to a movies. And I know what some of you all are thinking, but Charlotte, I don't have any money. Money's looking kind of funny. I didn't work this summer. We got you covered, okay? We have 20 of you covered at least. So here's what we need you to do, because everything isn't free. You have to do a little work. But what we'd like for you to do is to fill out a survey that's going to be coming your way in the usual email that we send out. And it's a survey getting some feedback. We want to hear how Summer Connect has impacted you, any of your suggestions, all of those different things. There's a team across the United States, some of them that you've met already, that they help plan and they put in hours to be able to serve you guys well. And they really want to hear your feedback. So please go ahead and open that email. That's number one. Don't hit delete or ignore. Open the email. Make sure to click on the link that talks about that mentions the survey. And the first 20 people to do that have a chance to win a $15 Fandango movie gift certificate. So we have Wonder Woman, we have all these movies out. And when your friends go to the movies next week and you don't have any money, don't be coming to us saying that we didn't help you out. We didn't try to connect you. Okay. So social media challenges. We've had so many social media challenges, and I really wanted to come up with a song to string all of our hashtags together. And I wanted to make a rap, but it's not going to happen. But I know from HubGrub, hashtag HubGrub, to hashtag Happy Hub, to hashtag Stepping Out on Faith, we have hashtagged it out this summer. But let me tell you, there is one group that has been a cut above the rest, and they've really kind of gone all the way with this whole Summer Connect idea. In fact, us as staff with Cru heard about their story last week at our Cru 17 conference. And we heard about a group from Penn State University. Shout out to Penn State. And you all have brought in people from really all over the country. In fact, we heard that you had 8 campuses represented at your hub group each week. And so big ups to you all. Thank you so much for your participation. And we also heard through a little birdie in the street that there's a really great ice cream place on your campus called the Berkeys, I believe. So we want you all to go out, enjoy some ice cream on us. We'll foot the bill. We'll have our people call your people. If you're lactose intolerant, take your pills, do whatever you need to do, but go out and enjoy it on us. And next summer, make sure you all are participating, you're posting, and you're really doing the most with Summer Connect, because this is a really great tool that we have to really get to further the gospel and to grow individually in our relationships with the Lord. So lastly, this is our last time together, as I mentioned, and I hope that over the last few weeks, you all have had time just to process, to grow. All of our speakers have been amazing, from Daryl Smith to Rich Perez, Renee Begay, Adam Go, Bob Foose, and just a number of great speakers. And I hope that that really propels you to think about some new things, to see God in a new way, and to really think about the value of connecting with Him, with the Lord, and connecting with other people in the process. And so as you move forward into your school year, as it gets started, I know some of you are like, don't talk about school. It's not coming yet, but it is. Face the facts. You have a few weeks left, but we want you to start your school year off right. So make sure, if you're not connected to a Cru movement or some sort of Christian ministry, to email us at summerconnect@cru.org. Sorry, I had a blank right there. But email us at summerconnect@cru.org. And if for some reason you forget the email, just respond to those emails that we send you and say, hey, I really want to get plugged in. I want to get connected. And for those of you who've been connected throughout the summer, grab a friend, grab a group of friends, and let people know what you've been doing and invite them out to Cru, or to your Epic, Destino, your impact movements, or your Cru high school movements, or your nation's movements. Invite them out and just allow them to have that opportunity that you've had to grow. So thank you so much from our team, and from the design team, from everybody who helped make Summer Connect possible. Thank you, and enjoy what's left of your summer. And post your pictures, because we want to see in these last few weeks. #SummerConnect17. Have a great day and a great evening. Goodbye.